Filipino Grievance against Governor Wood. Series of arbitrary acts committed by General Wood. He has refused to assent to laws which were the most wholesome and necessary for the public good. He has set enough both legal authority and responsibility of the Filipino heads of departments. He has substituted his constitutional advisors for a group of military attaches without legal standing in the government and not responsible for the people. He has reversed the policy of Filipinizing the service of the government by appointing Americans even when Filipinos of proven capacity were available. He has obstructed the carrying out of national economic policies duly adopted by the legislature merely because they are in conflict with his personal views. He rendered merely perfunctory the power of the legislature to pass the annual appropriation law by reviving items in the law of the preceding year, after vetoing the correspondent items of the current Appropriation Act in flagrant violation of the organic law. He has made appointments to position and authorized the payment of salaries, therefore, having vetoed the appropriation for such salaries. He has used certain public funds to grant additional compensation to public officials in clear violation of the law. He has arrogated upon himself the right of exercising the powers granted by law to the Emergency Board after abolishing said board on the ground that its power involved an unlawful delegation of legislative authority. He has unduly interfered in the administration of justice. He has refused to obtain the advice of the Senate in making appointments where such advice is required by the Organic Act. He has refused to submit the Senate appointment for vacancies occurring during the recess of the legislature in contravention of the Organic Act. He has continued in office nominees whose appointments had been rejected by the Senate. He has usurped legislative powers by imposing conditions on legislative measure approved by him. He has, in the administration of affairs in Mindanao, brought about the condition which has given rise to discord and dissension between certain groups of Christians and Mohammedan Filipinos. He has, by his policies, strained the relations between resident Americans and Filipino. He has endeavored, on the pretext of getting the government out of business, to dispose of all the companies capitalized by the government worth many millions of the people monies to powerful Americans' interests. He has sanctioned the campaign of insidious propaganda in the United States against the Filipino people and their aspiration. He has attempted to close the Philippine National Bank, so necessary to the economic development of the country. He has adopted the practice of intervening in and controlling directly to its minute details the affairs of the Philippine government, both insular and local, in violation of self-government. He has insistently sought the amendment of our land laws approved by the Congress of the United States, which amendment would open up the resources of the country to exploitation by predatory interests. Not content with these and other arbitrary acts, the Governor General has recently promulgated Executive Order Number 37. In the face of the critical situation, we, the constitutional representatives of the Filipino people, met to deliberate upon the present difficulties existing in the government of the Philippine Islands and to determine how best to preserve the supremacy and majesty of the laws and safeguard the rights and liberties of our people. In our behalf and in the name of the Filipino people, solemnly and publicly make known our most vigorous protest against the arbitrary acts and usurpation of the present Governor General of the Philippine Islands. We appeal to the judgment and conscience of the American people in justification of our stance and for the vindication of our rights.
Unlike the other primary sources, Filipino grievances against Governor Wood is not the work of an individual author, but the collective output of of a group of Filipino politicians who were forced by circumstances to unite against a common political enemy. It may also be classified as a protest or a petition letter. The draft of the document was attributed to two leading lawyers at that time, Jose Abad Santos and George Bacob. On November 17, 1926, the upper and the lower house of the Philippine legislature adopted the draft as a joint resolution. Jose Abad Santos was believed to be one of the leading attributors of the draft. Jose Abad Santos was appointed Under Secretary of Justice in 1921, but gave up the position at the height of the cabinet crisis in 1923. He served as the chief legal counsel of the Senate President and the Speaker of the House Representative, and it was during this time when he joined the anti-Wood campaign. George Bacobo helped President Manuel L. Quezon in many ways, from drafting speeches and statements to fighting for Philippine independence as a member of four independence missions to the United States in 1919 to 1924. He dedicated two of his books to the cause of Philippine autonomy, For Freedom and Peace, which opposed to the hair ways of cutting law in General Wood and Tato. A book consisting of articles he had written for the newspapers, holding the stand of President Quezon in the celebrated controversy between Filipino leaders and General Wood. Dr. Gregorio F. Zaide, renowned historian, has made significant contributions to Philippine history. Filipino Grievances against Governor Wood was taken from his documentary Sources of Philippine History. She compiled, edited, and annotated with additional notes of his daughter Sonia Zaide. The document served as an impeachment request for Governor Wood. It was approved by the Commission on Independence on November 17, 1920. 7 days after he wrote it. A year after it was approved, Governor Leonard Wood died due to surgery failure. The third paragraph of the document states that what prompted them to write the resolution was Wood's issuance of Executive Order No. 37. Declares the laws creating and defining the powers of the Board, which is authorized to vote the stakes owned by the government and certain private corporations, are absolute nullities. In this order, the Governor General also announced his purpose to exercise solely by himself and the powers and duties developing upon the sector. During the time of Governor General Leonard Wood, he was oppressive and wasn't able to keep the sacred pledge of America during his time. He took outrageous actions that made Filipinos suffer, such as choosing his own appointed officers whose appointments had been rejected by the Senate. Wood's conduct of government characterized by train absorptions and 21 arbitrary acts that resulted to the curtailment of our autonomy, destructions of our constitutional system, and the reversal of America's Philippine policy. The document of Dr. Zaide shows that by the 1920s, Filipinos had already the confidence to debate on equal footing with top-ranking American colonial officials like Governor Wood. Despite his military background and despotic tendencies, Quezon and his allies did not hesitate to raise their grievances against him. The complaints that they enumerated in the document clearly show that the root cause of the anti-Wood campaign was the decision of the latter to lessen the autonomy of the Philippine legislature and the increasing interference of the governor. Many Filipinos felt upset when all of a sudden they lost control and the jurisdiction of a certain government function that for several years were already part of their regular function. When Wood came in, he exposed the negative effects of Harrison's failure to put up safety measures that will prevent newly appointed and elected Filipinos from using their position to enrich themselves at the expense of the government and other people. He did not hesitate to veto the poorly crafted legislative outputs of both houses of Congress, and he also publicized the true financial state of the Philippine National Bank and other government-owned and controlled corporations. Wood specifically explained that the PNB debacle was the result of the illegal transfer of deposits from New York to Manila. Inexperienced management, dishonestly and reckless extension of credit to well-connected Filipino businessmen. It appears that Filipinos hated Wood not because he was pro-American, but because he implemented measures that prevented wasteful politicians from making extravagant appropriation. It also insinuates that not all critics of Wood's administration were clean and with noble intention when they campaigned for Philippine independence. Some were just employing diversionary tactics to direct the attention of the Filipinos away from their corrupt practices.
Filipino grievance against Governor Wood.